All right, we are live. Welcome into the quarantine edition of the Jack Mitchell podcast stream edition. How's everybody doing? Welcome to the show tonight. Glad to have you with us tonight. So I called up a couple of people who I think very much. Now, like, this is a big compliment because I don't say this about many people because I truly don't think about it about many people. But I called up two people who I think are smarter than me tonight to join me on the podcast. And the people you're going to see in front of you, in the middle there is Tim Hruza, who, if you've listened to my show, he has been known as my summer friend. Met him the first time on a golf course in a golf tournament where I was playing in a golf tournament with former Husker running back Corey Ross and a bunch of other people. And Hruza was on my team. He was a lawyer in Grand Island at the time, if I recall. Oh no, he just come back from Grand Island.
I was at Liba. I just moved back.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Worked for Liba then. You've worked for the legislature. You're now a dirty lobbyist. And you're an attorney. You're smart. You're a funny guy to be around. And so I wanted to get you on here. And then my other guest on the far right side of your screen is Professor Anthony Schutz, who graduated the UNL College of Law the same year I did, and did much better than I did, and is now a professor at the University of Nebraska College of Law while I have a radio show. Hi, Anthony. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. So people might have heard, maybe didn't hear. I am now in self-isolation in my bedroom by myself. My entire family lives downstairs now. I live upstairs because I got pink eye. And that's actually true. And so I'm really glad you guys are willing to do this tonight because I got nothing better to do at this point at all. All right. So I just want to throw some things out here and we're going to just see where this discussion goes from here on out. But I don't know, Tim, I'll start with you. Just your general reflections on how insane this dystopian movie that we're in right now is. When you wake up in the morning, are you like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it? Or do you take it on more rationally?
Interesting way to pose that question. So we've been at home. I'm fortunate that with my job, right, the legislature shut down and things have been, we can do most of what we do from home. So working with clients, talking to people, senators, whomever, you can do from your cell phone or your computer. So I've been at home now for, going on 2.5 weeks, mostly primarily at home since the legislature. The last time they were in session was a Thursday, 3 weeks ago today, actually. So I joked this morning with Rachel that it kind of feels like Groundhog Day, where I go out to shop and stuff, but we're kind of getting into a weird routine where we get up. We've got a 16-month at home. I wake up with her. We feed her breakfast, and then our day is just dictated entirely by work obligations and then juggling what she's doing at home. So I think what's really set in for me is that I've come to the realization this is only going to be a lot longer. And maybe I thought, when we first started talking about this, we were talking 14 days, and then you self-isolate or you isolate for 14 days, shut it down for 2 or 3 weeks. It's going to be longer than that. And I think that's probably what's really starting to set in for me.
Yeah. How about you, Anthony?
Yeah. So, you guys have at least some understanding of where I'm at. Imagine law school through a computer screen for the last, 5 or 6 weeks of the year, right? The second half of the course. Yeah. It's nuts.
Pointless.
And so, in a way, it's interesting. The medium has a lot of attributes to it that are beneficial. Reading a case or reading your materials the day before you go into class and then trying to keep up with the professor talking right in front of you at the same time. It's a challenge, right? But I can deliver a lecture with the readings on the screen at the time. I can tell a kid, this is what you should look at in this case. And right after they read the case, I could talk about different variations on that case. And so there's some really interesting pedagogical benefits to this medium. But none of it was planned, right? I mean, it's all just been trying to figure this out as we go. So professionally, that's been the big challenge. And then trying to figure out, like, administratively, what do we do with the law school? What do we do with grading? What do we do with all that sort of stuff? Personally, I've got a senior in high school, right, in her second semester, who was an athlete. So, I mean, you know, it gave us a good understanding of how, you know, we used to worry about things that we just don't worry about now because they're off the table. I also have a freshman who's a good athlete too. And, you know, she won't be able to compete this year. And then, of course, there's all the school and all of that. And then I have a junior high kid who's trying to do distance learning, and, you know, trying to get a junior high kid to look after their own studies and be self-motivated is a challenge as well. So I'm trying to juggle all that. And then, so yesterday, this goes to, you know, Jack's idea about self-isolation, how disruptive or different that is in the home. Yesterday, my partner, she's a phlebotomist at Bryan, and she got notice that she had drawn the blood of somebody who ultimately tested positive for COVID. So she's in not isolation, but she's in self-quarantine for another week so that she can get that 14-day period in. But then you've got to juggle, you know, your household, and sort of you're in one room and they're in another room, and you got to figure all that out. Throw in a little bit of family law stuff. I mean, she's divorced and she's got kids, and they've got, you know, custody stuff all over the place. And it is really amazing how disruptive this can get on the ground. And so all that's going on at my house, which is fun.
Wow. And how's your senior dealing with this? Like, she missed everything. She missed, like, the spring of your senior year.
Yeah.
There's a lot there. I mean, I remember my spring of my senior year. I have a lot of good memories.
Yeah. Yeah. I think really in stride. I mean, they did get 3/4 of the senior year done. And I think, you know, fairly early on in the senior year, you start to appreciate that this is the last year, and you start not taking things for granted pretty early in that year. So I think by the time we got to this, she had a good understanding of, like, how significant everything was, which kind of, like, in a way made it a little bit, it wasn't like she hadn't thought about how significant all this stuff was. But then when it's gone, I mean, it's gone. She's pretty good at it, at accepting it. I think we've talked a lot about it and that sort of stuff, but yeah, it's rough.
So have you got, like, I don't know, like, one of the things that I find myself doing a lot is just scrolling through Facebook and just wanting to pick fights on posts that I see, and just, I mean, from anything to epidemiology to medicine to constitutional law. Hruza, have you had to? I mean, you're generally pretty good at that. You don't pick fights on social media like I do. Have you had to hold yourself back yet?
You know, for the last 5 years or so, I have stopped dealing. I've really stayed away from being a keyboard warrior. I for whatever reason, I've been able to shut that off for the most part. Recently, though, I have been calling out the clear false shares. So there was a thing going around. Back. There was a thing posted a few days ago about, you know, this is called COVID-19 for the Chinese 19th version of a Chinese coronavirus. And, like, I just couldn't I couldn't scroll past that one. I linked to the CDC site that explains how they came up with the name, and with there's nothing true about that. That is the only time that I've done it. Some of that stuff's really getting to me. Aside from that, though, man, I have found myself very able to stay away from engaging in social media. I don't feel like it's a productive thing to do, to the extent that you're not changing hearts and minds there. And you guys are much more active on it than I am sometimes.
No, I agree with you. You're not going to change listen, I don't think I'm going to change minds via talk radio. So, like, I mean, that's I've come to that peace in my heart. I'm not going to change minds. I've taken your
phone calls. I've been in that studio.
I'm not going to change minds via talk radio, but I think the thing is, like, there's just some personal satisfaction in it. But I think it's shocking we get in our bubbles with the people that we talk to, and I'm not even in that much of a bubble because I interact with just tons of people because of my job, but I'll still scroll a Facebook feed and I will be shocked. And I accept like all the friends on my Jack account, and it just takes me about 30 seconds from scrolling that. I'm like, oh my gosh, we are in a bad position right now in terms of just like information. I don't know. What do you think, Anthony?
Yeah, I try to stay out of it. Sometimes, usually I get baited in if somebody starts commenting on something that I've written, mainly because, I don't have as big of a following or anything like that. So the people who I'm not as used to it. I remember a couple of years ago, I was writing stuff and putting stuff up about public access to rivers. And so like in the Loop River and things like that, we get a lot of fights about people that are running Jeeps up and down the Loop River, and they think they have the right to utilize the riverbed. But there's no like set of circumstances under which you have a right to drive a Jeep on somebody else's property. It's just not clear. But man, I got called a communist because I was championing private property rights. I had no idea just incoherent results, but people are very passionate about their incoherence, which is a difficult thing to do. It's fun stuff, but I haven't done as much of that with this stuff. I'll comment on, if there's a relatively good comment, but there's a piece to it that takes it a little bit deeper, or helps us to think about it a little bit more. I'll try to offer that, to try to add on to the complexity. Because the thing that frustrates me the most, it's not so much the incoherence, it's the absolutism that we see out there. Like, none of these things have any good answers to them. All we can really do is muddle around in them and try to make a decision. And the people who come at it with an answer, I just want to say, sort of poke at them a little bit and say, yeah, but that's not right. And that's just the law professor in me, I suppose. That's the main thing that we do.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, Anthony. I've seen a lot of claims, very strong claims, that there are restrictions going on that are unconstitutional, that are based on these stay-at-home orders, and especially as they pertain to First Amendment, as they pertain to religious organizations, and those sort of things. Are those open and shut cases in either direction, do you think?
No. I mean, so there's a public perception of what civil rights are, right? And then there's the legal view of what civil rights are. And the latter, I think, is what's probably but no right is absolute, right? No right is absolute. Right. Even your right to walk around is not absolute, because we can throw you in jail as long as we've got a very good reason for doing it, or a process set up in order to make the determination that we have a very good reason. So this is one of those situations where we've got very good reasons for doing what we're doing. And as long as they're justified, it doesn't sort of by definition violate anyone's legal rights. Politically, very good claims that we shouldn't be doing it, right? I mean, like, what was the claim I said there? This is violating our civil rights because, like, my forefathers died so that we could be free, right? And why should I have to, hole up so that I have those sorts of things? I mean, you can make those arguments, but they're mainly political arguments. They're popular arguments. They're not legal arguments, I don't think. So I don't think they're open and shut by any means, but I think there's a very strong argument that in an emergency like this, with this sort of a public health threat hanging out there, as long as these actions are reasonable, courts are going to say that it's okay. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean they wouldn't require the government, for example, to provide some compensation under some circumstances. There's all that takings jurisprudence and stuff like that. But, is a matter of like due process or First Amendment or, association, or I just don't see successful challenges to governmental action here.
Do you think the biggest thing you hear, the biggest mistake you hear, is this assumption that those rights are absolute, those constitutional rights and the Bill of Rights are absolute, and there are no exceptions that exist at all? I mean, is that the real basis of the mistake that we see usually?
It's the most common misconception about every right that people think that they have, from the Second Amendment to abortion to, everything, is the idea that there is some absolute. I just have never found a right that is absolutely protected under all circumstances. And so I think that's the primary misconception. Once you tell somebody they have a right, they tend to say they have this absolute ability to do things. And it's just not the case. And it doesn't take very long to convince people of that, right? Like, let's say private property ownership, for example. I mean, do you think you can do absolutely anything you want with your property? Most people would say, yeah, freedom, right? But I can't have a concrete mixing facility next to a early childhood, care center, right? It's just too dangerous. There's just too many flaws associated with those conflict. So everybody's rights depends upon the impact that you have on your neighbors. And at the end of the day, no right is absolute because nobody is absolute.
Yeah, I mean, if there was, if all the rights were absolute, somebody's losing, right? Somebody's missing out on their absolute right, right?
Yeah.
Tim, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I'm in the same boat as you, Jack, and that's one of the things I have bit my tongue on is some of that discussion, the political stuff. I mean, I've got good friends and people I respect and other attorneys too that actually think I saw you involved in one discussion with an attorney here in town who I think the world of
candidate
who's a very bright person and had a bit of a hot take on this sort of a thing that honestly just was not as fleshed out as I expect and I hope to see from people who should understand these constitutional things and some, like the back and forth and the push and pull and the way that you weigh those interests. I think your response in that thread was spot on. And there's stuff like that really just disappoints me. People understand that, and there are people that know better also, and that still take the political route and throw it out there. And that's the stuff that bothers me most of all. I think from a rights standpoint, I think that the governor has done a very good job in Nebraska. I have not followed what's happening in other states, and even the stuff on the national level. I'm watching it, but it's sometimes tough to pay attention to and to keep focused on. But I do think that the governor here in Nebraska has done things in a pretty measured way, and I think they've done a very good job with it. I think that Anthony's right that there's probably some takings questions. There's probably some authority questions. There's probably some who has the power to do what questions. Those may or may not get raised. Depends on how long this goes and who has the will to bring it to court. But for the most part, I think that this administration is doing a pretty good job of weighing those things out and taking a measured approach that doesn't overly or unduly burden anybody beyond what I think the experts that are talking about the public health concerns would say is reasonable and necessary. So to that extent, I don't think that there's any egregious detrimental deprivation of anybody's rights that I've seen so far. There are some concerning moves that are hurting people, they're hurting businesses economically, financially, and that's all a real impact that's happening. But for the most part, I feel like it's been pretty measured.
What are you guys thinking is happening behind the scenes right now? Because there's obviously there's some pressure on the governor to do this shutdown, stay at home, whatever you want to call it. There's all these, and I think part of the reason is all the names for this. He's not doing it. He's saying he's not going to do it. I talked to him tonight, like 2 hours ago, from my bedroom. I did have pants on, but barely. And I asked him again, and I said, is there any plan at all to go forward to the next level? There's now 8 states that don't have these orders, and he said no. Tim, I'll ask you because you have a good idea what goes on kind of in the backroom dealings on some of these. What do you think's going on in the background with those conversations?
Well, I don't think I'd go so far as to say I understand what they're talking about behind the scenes, because I can't imagine what it's like to be in the room for some of these conversations. What I can say is that, at least the last couple of days and even the last week or so, Governor Ricketts has been very clear that he has no intention of issuing a stay-at-home order. And that was well before we'd seen 40, 44, 45 states, whatever it is, that have done this so far. But here's the thing, Jack, and you've made the point a number of times on Twitter and on your social media, and it's something that I've been talking about with people I talk to all the time. if you sit down and you take a look at those orders, and then you turn around and compare what law enforcement across the country is and in these different states is saying in terms of how they'll enforce the order, it comes down to the name that we give it, right? We are about as restrictive as what I've seen in some other states in terms of what we're doing. I think Pete Ricketts made that clear today during his press conference when he sort of explained some of the measures that he's put in place with the directed health measure in different areas in different counties, and compared it to what's going on in other states. You look at law enforcement in some of those states, aside from the fact that it's called a stay-at-home order, they're not able to arrest people. They're not, I mean, and Professor Schutz is the constitutional lawyer in the room, but the enforceability of it is one thing, and the name of what you call it is another thing. There's some value in telling people and calling it a stay-at-home order and people taking it more seriously. But I also think, too, I'm no public health expert either, but the governor's been clear that he's following the UNMC's plan, and that it was made in consultation with professionals and medical experts at the Med Center. Nebraska is a geographically diverse state with an urban and rural population that moves about differently. And so to the extent that there are, some public health bases for not telling everybody to stay at home at the same time statewide, I think you got to defer to the medical experts that kind of this shutdown regionally must be the better way to go. I think some people believe, and I sort of believe too. I mean, I hear from people. Heck, I was at Target yesterday. I did my grocery shopping for the first time we've been out in maybe 10 days to the grocery store. There were 4 or 5 families, full family, husband, wife, 3 kids walking through the aisles, grocery shopping and having a good time. And I get it, but I don't know that everybody else is getting it, And so there's some value in using the words, but the legal effect of what we have in place is still pretty on par with what's going on in other states, as far as I can tell.
Anthony, what do you make of the way that the governor's attacked this? Kind of had a very said at the beginning, these are my benchmarks. When they hit, I'm going to do this. They hit, he did that. And now he said, I'm not going on beyond that. And he sounds like he's sticking to that. There may be a point where you see a map and Nebraska's the only one that's not in red, the entire country.
Yeah,
I'm curious what you think of that.
So I think the response has been measured and well-reasoned, and he's got benchmarks and all of that. I think he drew an unfortunate line in the sand when he said, I'm not going to do, shelter in place orders or stay at home orders, right? And I don't think he adequately anticipated maps with 48 red states and 1 Nebraska in the middle. I think he wanted to maintain the argument that, look, we're doing what's appropriate. Stay at home orders are there's just a name associated with a set of principles or a set of restrictions that we put in place. And our restrictions are as significant or a bit less significant than those in other states. But I don't think he adequately anticipated the binary construct that came to be, which is states that have these orders and states that don't have them. And it would have been like, we've never seen this before. So why would he anticipate that? But when he drew that line in the sand and said, I'm not going to go any further, he set himself up for being compared in certain ways to different states. And I think that was unfortunate. I do think that there is a very significant geographic distinction between Nebraska and some of the other places in the country. And so this idea that we've got, what are they, health units or I can't even remember what the categories are, but we've got these geographic areas and we can sort of tailor our approach to what's necessary in those places. The rural areas are very interesting and very, very difficult to try to figure out because you get a few cases of community spread in an area that's got a couple thousand people. Everybody's very tied together. You've shut down the school, but if you shut down the coffee shop, because if you didn't shut down the coffee shop, you've got 20 guys getting together, probably all over 60. And, one of them goes to the nursing home and boom, 90% of your population has been exposed within a matter of, weeks, and you don't know it until 3 weeks later. So those rural areas, the numbers aren't big, but the connections are significant. And trying to figure out how to do that in an area where you've got 20 ICU beds for 30,000 people, maybe 15 vents, right? And so are you going to ship those people all the way to Lincoln and Omaha? And are we going to take them? So it's an extraordinarily, that's the thing, like behind the scenes, having to deal with all of those problems would be very difficult to do. And then to go out before, the press every day and have to answer this question about, are you going to do a stay-at-home order or not? He's like, no, I've got more complicated questions to deal with.
I mean, to his credit, you're right. There's become this sort of artificial binary question, stay at home or not stay at home. And I've read some of the stay at home orders. They're a little bit different. Some of them sound not that different at all than what's happening in Lincoln, Nebraska right now. I mean, there's probably slight tweaks. There's some non-essential businesses that would be closed, but we've become dominated by this whole conversation of, and you put it really well, Anthony, binary, stay at home versus not stay at home. And people aren't paying attention to, how different that would actually be if it would happen. Mm-hmm. And I think the governor kind of has gotten caught in that. I mean, to his defense, I think he's gotten caught in that. And maybe he could say, hey, we've got another step. What he maybe could say is just, hey, we've got another step. We've got some more. We're just going to make more non-essential businesses at this point. Yeah. But instead, he's trapped by that nomenclature, basically.
I have a lot of confidence. I didn't think that I would have this sort of confidence, but I do, because I when I see the governor get up and speak every day, I see somebody who's thinking about and consulting with lots of people and listening to what they're saying, and has smart people in these rooms dealing with this complexity. And you compare that to the federal level. I mean, the thing that gives me assurance on the daily sort of, broadcast or whatever that is the two doctors that get up and speak from time to time. I don't get the sense that, the commander in chief is thinking hard about the things that are, I think he's, I get the sense that he's somewhat confused most of the time by what's going on and trying to latch on to certain things and run with them because that's what he's been accustomed to doing. But I don't get that sense from the governor. And that gives me, he makes me think of like Hegel and some of those folks, right? It seems like he's thinking and he's not really, just trying to score points or something like that. And why would he? I mean, he's charged with dealing with a sort of a catastrophe that he wouldn't have imagined, I don't think. And I think he's stepping up and getting it done. Hopefully he's got the support he needs from the federal level. Frankly, I'm a little bit worried that we haven't really been tested yet. And I don't mean tested. I mean, we haven't really been put to the very difficult choices that places like, Florida and New York and places like that have been put to. But
Tim, have you heard as many people as I have said, I don't really agree with the governor's politics, but I think he's handled this really well. I've heard a ton of that lately.
I talk to a lot of people. I see the social media stuff, obviously. I talk to a lot of people on both sides of the political aisle, people that are involved directly and people that are involved behind the scenes and people that are just kind of in the political area. I think a lot of people have been pretty impressed with what Governor is doing. And I'm one of them, right? I think that a lot of these I don't think a lot of these decisions have been politically motivated. And I think that he's acted quite decisively. I mean, you've seen governors across the country hem and haw through this thing. I mean, we got one that comes out today and uses the excuse that he didn't know it was transmissible by somebody who's asymptomatic. I'm not an expert in this at all. I feel like that's been pretty well documented since early March. That's
the scariest thing.
If you were following it at all or talking to anybody, you knew that. Yeah. Pete Ricketts hasn't been that person. So to that extent, I think we're in pretty good hands as far as things have gone out. I think Nebraska's uniquely situated. And I do think that we get huge benefit from those geniuses at the Med Center that are working on this thing and that are, have a seat at the table in that room.
Yeah. Can I say this? There's something like uniquely and oddly calming about, as much disdain that I've got for the current political system and that I don't feel like I'm really excited about any part of it, about the fact that there are people with whom I don't agree down the line on policy with, but whom I also think have capabilities of being leaders, have capabilities of listening to experts. And then there are the people who I don't think can do that. And it's nice to know that there's a middle class there that isn't necessarily just a catastrophe, if you know what I mean. That may be kind of a shallow win in this whole thing, but I feel like I have that sometimes. And when I've And I feel like a lot of people saying about that, about their local, at least here, about their, their mayors, their governors, and those sorts of, and you can see it in some of the other states, not all of them, but some of them.
Yeah. One thing that I think is interesting, and I'd like be interested in your thoughts on this, Jack. So it seems like about a week ago, we had a lot of sort of people who wanted to engage this debate that it wasn't worth the economic costs, right? This idea that we could somehow, decide that we're not going to suffer this much for this many lives or something along those lines. I haven't seen that for about a week now. Do you think New York and those sorts of things, just people seeing the actual human toll, led them to say, you know what, this isn't the sort of balance that we're even willing to consider anymore? Or do you still see that sort of lingering?
No, a little, but it's way on the fringe. There was more. You're exactly right. There was more a week ago. One part of it is that seeing the reality of New York, and one part of it is the president completely changed his tone on Sunday, starting on Sunday, and he basically said, I had a model put in front of me where 2.2 million people were going to die. I had people telling me they wanted me to ride it out, and I didn't think that was right. And as you know, he's got some influence, and so I think that probably put out a lot of those fires. So I don't think it's as prevalent as it has been. There aren't many people trying to even make that argument anymore now. Of course, they're arguing in scope. Where should some of these restrictions be? But you're right. If we went back a week ago and scrolled to Facebook, I mean, that would be the predominant argument, and I don't know that it is anymore.
Yeah,
I sort of think that things took a bit of a turn. I don't remember if it was Sunday or Monday during the president's press conference. Toward the end, he made a comment, and he shared sort of a personal story about a friend of his from New York that ended up healthy one day and ended up in a coma the next, I presume on a ventilator of some sort. And I don't know if there's more details that have come out of that, but he said it during the press conference. And part of you sort of wonders if that doesn't change a person's attitude, right? Like you said, Anthony, you start to see the direct human toll it has. It kind of wakes you up to how serious this is. Plus, from the president, so some of that trickles down, obviously, from the president and the leader of that sort of faction that had been slow to come around to this. It's also right in his backyard. I mean, New York's where he grew up and where he's from, and you got a hospital right there near Brooklyn that's just underwater. And I think that really makes things a reality. And I think you also start to realize too, what's also hard about this, I think, just for the average person to grasp, is that it's a slow burn, right? You're a marathon runner, Schutz, right?
Yeah.
It's a long haul before we're done. This isn't automatic. This is a slow deal. People don't see it for weeks. It lasts months, if not, who knows, a year. And I think that we're getting closer to seeing it be really bad. And I think that's really opening eyes and shutting people up too, for good, which is.
I know you guys are attorneys, not economists, but I think the $1 million question is literally, how in the heck is this going to work out economically? I mean, a multi-trillion-dollar stimulus plan, all kinds of people who are having financial ruin, businesses closing down. Tim, I'll start with you. I mean, and I know you don't have the answer, but when you think about 6 months from now economically, how do you even begin to piece together the thoughts?
I don't. I mean, but you look at things like unemployment numbers, and when they were putting together a bill, what is that? It feels like it's been months ago, but a week or two ago, 10 days ago, when when Congress is putting together a bill and figuring out $600 a month additional in unemployment, and you're kind of figuring out those things, and they have a projected 3 million or so new applications expected in the last week or so. And the numbers come out today, and you're over 6 million.
Yeah,
it's double what they thought would come. And heck, the state of Nebraska isn't even on a full wide DHM, so you still got restaurants in different places that haven't been told to close and that are starting to work through that. Heck, our daycare just today announced that. I mean, they're closing starting tomorrow finally, because they've got a positive test of a relative of one of the workers there, and so they've decided to shut down. They want to keep all those people on staff, but how do you know who you're laying off and stuff? I think you're gonna have more waves of that unemployment thing, and and regardless of what anybody says, there's a lot of businesses that if you're shut down for a period of time, I don't know how you reopen. You lose that brand loyalty, you lose the regular people coming back in, and there's going to be a period of time too when people aren't comfortable. I mean, unless you've had COVID and you feel comfortable that you're immune, how do you go to, a bar that's filled with 50 people confidently? If you're somebody who has not suffered for it and can feels confident that you've had COVID and have been through it and have some sort of immunity, how do you go back out into a public place like that? Until we have some more assurances, I think things are going to be drastically different. I think it's going to take a huge economic toll.
Yeah. Anthony, what do you think?
Well, I definitely think one consequence will be this next round of political debate we won't have the luxury anymore of talking about socialism versus not socialism. We won't be focused on pro-life versus gun rights. We're going to be focused in on what is the way through this economic difficulty that we're in, and how do we make people's lives better? I mean, I just think the entire political attention span is going to change from something that used to maybe be not as meaningful as this, right? I mean, people are definitely going to be engaged in this. Economies, I don't even know how to even wrap my head around the idea of a national economy, right? What is that, right? What are all of the different resources and businesses involved? And we have no way of anticipating really how all of the resources that we have will be redeployed. Maybe we don't have bars and restaurants. Maybe we have a hell of a lot more home delivery stuff and things along those lines. I mean, maybe those jobs are picked up in different ways. The people are still there. The capital's still there. I mean, none of it's gone. It's still there. It'll just be, this idea of getting it jump started again. There are folks that argue that, it's not about borrowing money, it's about making more money, right? We need to make the money machine spin, get money out to people, and then let it build itself up from the bottom up. I think, that's probably right. I have no idea how to stimulate an economy, especially when I have control of the currency, right? So it'll be tremendously interesting to see how this works out. And the federal government's going to play a huge role in that because it's going to have to. This is a national problem. The state, this is going to be, I don't know if property tax relief is something that we're going to really be able to accomplish. We may need to raise some damn revenue in order to get through this. We may have to give people money. Instead of prohibiting foreclosures, we may need to, or prohibiting, evictions, we may need to get money to people so they can pay their rent. And if the feds aren't doing it, then maybe we're going to have to do it. But hopefully the feds will do it, right? And hopefully that national concern can sort of creep in and we can rebuild this economy in a way that is, I don't know if I ever want to say sustainable. Maybe our economy is sort of by definition sustainable because of the way it's designed, but we'll get there. We got to get through this. We got to get the illness out. And, this pandemic might also operate or open up other lines of business that like creating masks and creating all of the ventilators. And, we may need mobily deployable hospitals. And, I have no idea the sort of economic activity that will result from this sort of thing. But I think it's promising. And I think we have this history of being very resilient. We may need some leadership on it, but I think it's there. So I'm pretty optimistic. I've seen, and part of that is, growing up, I saw the farm crisis of the 80s, right? And I saw us, work through that and redeploy resources in different ways. And the industry looks a lot different than it did then. But that's kind of the way all of this works, right? Everything's going to look a lot different. That's part of what development means. But hopefully we can get everybody to work.
Yeah, Tim, how different do you think state politics looks after? I know Anthony got to that a little bit kind of on a larger scale and talked about maybe property tax isn't a discussion anymore. And who knows, maybe this is the gateway to sports gambling and legalized weed in Nebraska. I don't know, but what do you think?
I think there's a lot of huge question marks surrounding what it looks like. John Stinner, chairman of the Appropriations Committee, circulated a letter to senators today just kind of saying, normally we come out with a forecast. We're not even going to try, right? There's so many unanswered questions, and a lot of what our budget looks like depends a lot on federal things. The stimulus package that was passed has a lot of impact on not only our internal numbers, but what we can or can't do and what we're looking at. Man, I am thankful that we have someone like John Stinner in charge of that sort of stuff, but I don't know if we have those questions answered this year. My assumption is that the legislature is going to have to come back and have to say, you know what, I don't know. We don't know what money's here, so we can't in good conscience spend it. And we're going to have to wait and see what things look like next session when they come back to do a biennial budget. I mean, on the flip side, when you talk about something like property taxes, farmers probably aren't the portion of the economy that gets hit the hardest by this sort of stuff. People still got to eat. People still got to, I mean, you're still going to be producing crops. You're still going to be selling crops. But when you talk about economic impact, I mean, property taxes are expensive. And when people don't have money to pay their property taxes because their businesses are shut down, that takes a toll on the local government too, that's funded by those property taxes. So there's going to be a pressure to look at it. I just don't know what money you use to do it. And again, when you have all these question marks and you have no idea what things look like, I sure as heck, if I were the policymaker with a vote, I don't know if I could vote for a bill that spends money on something like that, not knowing what we have to look forward to either.
The problem we run into in the ag sector is we're so dependent on export consumption, right?
Sure.
I mean, we just produce so much more than we can possibly eat here that, you know, this impact on a global scale could actually have a huge impact on commodity prices, just because like right now, the price of cattle it's in the tank. Well, and the reason is because people in other countries don't have money to purchase this sort of stuff. So that margin goes away and boom, we've got tremendously more supply than we have demand. And we get this dramatic drop. And then $20 a barrel oil. I mean, the livelihood of corn farmers rests on the price of oil more than anything else, right? That happened, in 2008 when we tied basically our agricultural policy to energy policy. And so $20 a barrel oil means that ethanol plants get shuttered. Ethanol plants get shuttered. You've decreased the demand for corn. And, again, we're just going to be in a world of hurt, really, I think, on the ag side as well. Those property taxes will be big there. I don't know what the answer is on any of those fronts.
So we've talked about this economically. We've talked about it politically. Let's finish with this. Maybe, I don't know if culturally is the right word or what, because there have been multiple times. So we've talked about a lot of the bad parts of this. There have been multiple times where I feel like we're going through some sort of great rebalancing of our lives. I don't know if you guys have felt like that at all, but just in terms of, I mean, I've got two kids. I've got and Anthony can relate to this. I've got a 15-year-old and a 9-year-old. Like once 2:00 hits any day, 2:00 to 10:00, any day right now, we would have had nonstop stuff. We've eaten more meals at our table together. I've called my mom a gazillion more times than I had in the last, month before. It's just weird, and, call it whatever you want, but it seems like there's some great cultural rebalancing or social rebalancing that's going on with all of this. And I don't know if that's going to be the positive legacy. And I don't know if that all dies the minute things get normal again. Maybe it does, but I'm curious if you guys have seen that at all. Tim, have you seen that at all?
Well, certainly. I mean, at our house, yeah. And I think the broader question is, what does it look like to get back to normal, right? That's the one I've been kind of grappling with. A lot of talk about whether football is going to happen in the fall. That's kind of where the conversation starts to be pivoting in the sports world. And you even heard the governor say it today at the press conference, right? If you want football, you better start getting pretty good at social distancing. Those are the sort of conversations that, from my standpoint, what's changed the most is that you just don't have expectations for what next week's going to look like, or what are you going to be doing in July? I don't know. Probably sitting at home, just like I've been doing for the last 3 weeks. That's kind of the bigger question mark for me, is how we get back to normal and what that looks like in terms of whether it changes social interaction in general or how people relate to one another. think we're getting used to a lot of different mediums. This is one of them, right? I mean, you're watching late night talk shows from people's basements. I'm watching podcasts that are live streamed on a computer through Zoom or WebEx or StreamYard as we're using now. But I think some of those mediums are just completely changing and how we consume entertainment and what that all looks like. Some of that stuff's going to stay around. Personal relationships will be interesting, right? People aren't going to jump back to, like I said, I don't know when I'll feel comfortable going to a bar again. Probably not until I know that I'm immune from whatever this thing is, or that we have a vaccine, or that we have a very good treatment that makes it less dangerous than it is for a lot of people. Until that happens, I mean, I think we're looking at gradual changes, and I think some of this sticks, and I think some of it's good, and I think some of it's really bad. It's really hard. I miss my friends. There's people that I see every day. I miss my coworkers. I love my daughter, but she's who we hang out with more than anybody else. You know, it's just a different time to be. It's just, what's the most difficult, I think, is that it changed very drastically, right? In the course of a couple weeks, your day-to-day schedule, life, expectations. My calendar's been cleaned out, which is weird, and it's a hard thing, and it makes you learn to live differently and do things differently.
Anthony, do you think there's some sort of rebalancing going on? And if so, is it going to last?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a rebalance. I think there's two pieces to this that are going to, at least have a lingering presence in people's minds after it's over. One is, I think just this idea, and there's kind of two pieces to this first one. The idea that we were sort of able to right away eliminate a bunch of things that weren't that important. We thought they were important for a long time, but they really weren't that important because we could give them up, right? All of the athletics, all of my kids' athletics. School, I don't know if I want to say school's unimportant, but, at the end of the day, if you got to not go to school, we can do that. We can not go to school. We can go in our houses, right? So there's definitely this importance about like what is significant, right? Because if those things were that significant, we would have kept doing them even though people were going to lose their lives, right? So this idea of like figuring out what's important, it's the people around you, it's your home, it's that sort of stuff. And I think that'll linger for a while. The other thing that I think is very important about this, and we've all been reminded of it in the last probably 5 years in our own lives, is just this idea of, health and death and suffering, right? We go about our daily lives not really thinking about that until we're reminded of it. I lost my wife, Jack, you lost your dad. I mean, these sorts of things like can hit you. And that's the sort of thing that I think lingers and will have a big impact on people going forward. And it's good to be reminded of that from time to time so you don't take things, take things for granted. I think in this situation, for me personally, given my experience with my wife, there was some familiarity to it, right? This idea that your life can be totally upended in a heartbeat, that wasn't a new experience to me, right? That had happened before. So that didn't really bother me that much. And this idea of, health and being healthy and those sorts of things, I think has always been with me for a while, at least since Corey got sick. So I think those sorts of things are going to have a big impact on people's lives going forward. They're not going to take things for granted. They're going to have maybe a better understanding or a more accurate understanding of what's important. And maybe that'll influence their behavior. Maybe they'll be able to maybe see that for other people too.
Let me ask you this, Anthony. I don't know. Like I was scared. I think I would say I was scared, terrified of death before my dad died. I don't know if I still am now. I think that changed it. I'm curious what you think, how losing your wife has changed how you look at death, and if this whole thing might have a similar effect societally, because I don't know, maybe that's the case. I'm not sure. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, familiarity with it just has an important, I think, impact on how we conduct our daily lives. The idea that it could all be over tomorrow, right? And it could all be over tomorrow for everybody that we care about. And that's even one of the more powerful aspects of it. I think that helps us, not fill space with negativity all the time. And I have this talk with my students in law school, actually, to try to get them to think about, how fleeting all of this can be. And so, yeah, I think it has an impact on the way people think and the way people act. And we start to think of ourselves as invincible and we're going to live forever. But I encourage people to think of their own demise. Like, what would happen if you were gone tomorrow? And what would happen if the person you care about most in the world was gone tomorrow? Mm-hmm. What would you regret? Right. And if you think about those things from time to time, I think it helps us, be nicer to each other, frankly, and look out for one another and try to do good things. But yeah. I don't know.
Tim, you went through this recently with your brother. I'm curious how everything that's going on now, how that impact, maybe it doesn't impact at all. But I think all of us have been through something where we've lost someone close to us, and it's very much impacted. I think we probably think about death more often. Where are you at right now with all that?
I was telling a good friend of mine this when this whole thing first started happening, and then you had the first kind of positive case in Nebraska, and I was a lot more, hey, this is happening, I think, than a lot of people around me were. This is a serious thing. It's going to happen. And I told one of my close friends, kind of made the comment, oh, you're pretty doom and gloom about this early. A lot of my realization that this was real and happening comes from the fact that, and I even told him, I saw something like this sort of happen with my brother, went from being a healthy, fun kid to gone in a couple of weeks due to an infection that happened a lot faster than anybody expected. And I think the fact that it got personal for me makes me very much appreciate the idea that a lot of people are going to lose their lives in this thing. And it makes you stop and think about how serious it is and why conversations about whether we should let this thing burn through or take some measures that are reasonably calculated to try to curtail it, why that's just an absurd discussion to have, and why those lives are valuable. And like Anthony said too, it really makes you appreciate what you have around you and who's in your life. It makes you kind of take inventory of who those people are, and the folks that you're making the efforts to call and FaceTime. I've FaceTime friends this week that I talk to via text message occasionally, but I haven't talked on the phone in years, and I'm taking the time to FaceTime them. Like, I wasn't doing that before. And part of it is it's what we have right now to talk to people, and we don't know what the things are going to look like in a month or so, and it can turn on a dime real fast. I think all that perspective has been definitely influenced the way I'm looking at this thing, the way I'm making decisions about why we haven't left the house really for any good reason for going on 3 weeks or more now. And why I'm very glad and fortunate to have a job and a lifestyle that allows me to do that when I know a lot of people still have to go to work, right? They still got to do, I have sisters-in-law that are working in the medical field right now, going to work every day at hospitals. It just makes you check what's important and makes you think about those things. And sadly, I think a lot of people are going to gain that same sort of perspective out of how this whole thing plays out.
That's the thing I see. Like, whenever I see one person gone, right, I think of the 10 people that are close to that person that are suffering as a result of their departure, right? Yeah. So this 500,000 or 200,000 or 2 million isn't 500,000 or 2 million. It's more like 10 million people are going to suffer because of this, because of a direct result of these losses, not including even the people that are sick and lives are changed for a while. But like, the people that, the people we lost, they left behind a whole bunch of people that their lives are forever changed as a result of that loss. So when I see these, I got to think that those changes are going to be significant. I don't know if they'll be in ways that we can detect in political systems or something along those lines. But if 100,000 people die, there's 1 million people that are dramatically affected by that, I think.
That's a good point. That's a great point. Well, last thought, and we'll finish this up, is what's going to be I don't know if you guys have done this like me, but like thinking of just those moments of normalcy that we used to have, and the first time you're going to feel them again, whether it's like going out to eat at a restaurant, whether it's going to, people that go to church, whether it's, oh my gosh, going to a football game, all of those moments of getting back to that, of these things that we've just assumed forever, I mean, that almost makes me excited to think about it. You know, just the appreciation of that moment. I don't know what it's going to feel like. And I hope they're coming fairly soon, and I hope it feels as good as I think it will. But I think about that a lot.
You're so optimistic. I don't have that. I wish I had the same optimism, man. I think it's going to be slower. I don't think there's going to be a moment. I don't think there's going to be like, I don't think that you're going to go to a football game with joy this fall. Like, and I don't think you're going to have 90,000 fans at a Husker game. Again, unless we have some awesome breakthrough, which I'm really hopeful for, and scientists figure this thing out. But I'm a little more pessimistic about it, Jack. I hate to be the downer, but I think it's going to be slow, and I think we're going to work our way back into it. And
whenever it happens, it's going to happen.
A dinner with 10 friends, right? When I feel comfortable doing that, I'll be very happy. I don't know. I don't know what it's going to be. Sorry, Anthony. Be more positive.
Nah, well, so we got the optimist, we got the pessimist, and then I think I'll just be the realist, nihilist. Right? The idea that the nihilist, just the realist. The idea that, I mean, every day just sort of is what it is, right? And so we're in this position now, and this is the hand we've been dealt, but that's the hand we've been dealt. That's where we are. I mean, after your dad died, after your brother died, has the world ever been the same? No, it hasn't been the same. It's been fundamentally changed in lots of different ways. But you wake up and, after a while, you learn to, not really sort of accept it, right? You just move forward. And so I think we've got that sort of a construct here that, like, the world is going to be different in a lot of different ways, but that's okay, because the world changes all the time, and sometimes in more fundamental ways than others, sometimes ways that are more painful than others, sometimes in ways that are good, sometimes in ways that are bad. So I don't know. I just try to roll with it. The Lebowski approach to the world. I don't know.
Whatever. Don't take away. There's going to be I'm not buying the idea, Hruza, that there's not going to be several moments coming where we are like, oh my gosh, I did this all the time. I didn't do it for, 4 months, 6 months, a year, whatever it is, whenever it is. And now I'm doing it again. And oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be doing it again. I think those are coming, and that gets me through.
High hopes, low expectations. Just roll with that. You'll be fine.
All right. Very good. All right. We're going to call it good on that, since Hruza won't come over to my side of positivity on this whole thing.
Give me some time. Give me some time. I'm working through it. I don't know.
All right. Sounds good. All right. Hey, I want to thank both of you for doing this. Thank you to the 7 to 9 people who watch this the whole time. We'll post it up on YouTube. We'll get a bunch more views that way. But guys, you know how much I hate admitting, if you watch me fight people on social media, that folks are smarter than me, but you too. I love hearing what both of you have to say, and thanks so much for taking the time, and I hope we can do it on another topic sometime soon. All right.
Anytime.
Thanks, Jack.
All right. We'll see y'all later. Have a good one. And broadcast.